Hello, I'm Nick Park from Evangelical Alliance Ireland, and this is our weekly message. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. It is the coldest day of the year so far. In fact, the windows on my recording studio are all iced up. And last night I was at a church in Dublin, one of our churches there. I was ordaining a new deacon. And after the service, about 11:30 at night, I came outside and the car was covered with snow. And I thought, oh man, winter is here. So we want something this morning that is going to warm your heart. So I've got a good news story today. Just in the last 10 days or so, there was an article in the Guardian newspaper in England based on census results saying that for the first time ever in recorded history, the number of people who identify as Christians in England and Wales has fallen below 50%. Now, I know some of you are already saying, Nick, we thought you wanted to cheer us up, not make us more depressed. Well, I believe this actually is a reason for good cheer. Now, when that news broke and people put it up on social media, a friend of mine, Glyn Barrett, over at Audacious Church in Manchester, Glyn put it up on his Facebook feed, and somebody immediately said, fake news. Well, actually, let me tell you something. The fake news is that anybody ever thought that more than 50% of the people in England and Wales were Christian, because they weren't. People have identified as Christian because they were baptized as a baby, because they were born into a family that was quote unquote Church of England, even though they had no living faith in Jesus Christ. In fact, for years, we've had false statistics. You know what? It's made my blood boil every time I see these books that purport to give the latest figures of the number of Christians that are in different countries in the world. And I see Ireland listed as like 90% Christian. And you and I both know that there's no way in a million years that 90% of the people in Ireland are Christian. Christians are a small minority in this country. Yeah, and what's happening, of course, is they're either counting people who just call themselves Catholic, whether they have any belief in God or not, or even they're recording the statistics they get from the Catholic Church of the number of people that are officially Catholic because they were baptized as babies. And so I've always, for years, I've looked at those figures and thought, man, that is so misleading. Every gangster and drugs dealer is listed as being a Christian in those figures. So actually, the fake news, as far as Britain was concerned, was that there's ever been a time, certainly in my lifetime, when more than 50% of the British population were Christians. What this figure is actually showing is that more people are now admitting that they're not Christians. And that is good news. In fact, Glyn Barrett, when he put that up on his Facebook page, his response immediately underneath was, what an opportunity. Why? Because part of the challenge we've always had in nominally Christian countries is in trying to tell people about what Jesus can do for them and their need to find Jesus. They say, but I'm a Christian already. I was baptized as a baby. I'm born in a Christian family, in a Christian society, in a Christian country. So actually, for those of us who are evangelical Christians who want people to embrace the gospel, this is good news. That less and less people are pretending to be Christians, and that makes it so much easier to share the gospel with them. I am reminded of an old story about a shoe salesman who went off to some far-flung part of the world to sell shoes. And this was back in the days of telegrams and steamships. And he sent a message back to the head office, a telegram that said, please bring me home straight away. It's a waste of time trying to sell shoes here because nobody wears shoes. So they brought him back again. But they did send out another salesman who had a different attitude. And after a few weeks, he sent back a telegram and said, please send me more supplies. It's wonderful here because everybody needs shoes. So when I read statistics about the numbers of people that claim to be Christian, I don't look at them and say that's terrible. If there's less people claiming to be Christian, then my job's harder in sharing the gospel. No, not at all. I say this is wonderful because now people are admitting that they don't have Jesus. And that makes our task and our mandate of sharing Jesus with them so much more straightforward. And actually, sometimes we see things in the press and we just start getting in our head media and trying to make a slant and trying to attack the faith. The Guardian paper, I'm sure, is no great fan of the Christian gospel. But just 2 days later, they ran another story. And that story was about how, scientifically speaking, not speaking in faith, but purely speaking from science and following the science, they shared the facts and the research borne out from many different surveys in many different countries, which is that people who have a faith in Jesus Christ and worship in church actually live longer, up to 5 to 6 years longer than the comparable people in society. They also recover more quickly from disease and sickness. In other words, they say going to church and being a Christian, being part of a community of faith, is actually good for your health and good for your lifespan. But there was one other statistic buried in one of those surveys that really fascinated me. And it was this. It was saying that when people are suffering from particularly potentially fatal illnesses, the outcomes of what happens with them is not just on whether you believe in God or not just even whether you go to church or not, but it's what kind of God you believe in. And they said this, that people who primarily see God as being angry and vengeful and judgmental, they tend to have a lower than average rate of recovering from serious illness. They actually die more than people in the population who don't believe in God at all. But people who believe in God as a God of love and a God of grace and a God of forgiveness and a God of restoration, those people have a much higher rate of surviving serious illnesses than the general population, which should not surprise us, because if you primarily see God as somebody who's looking for a reason to bash you over the head, that's probably not going to help you have the right attitude to recover from sickness. But if you see God as being the God who he is, because God is love. Yes, he's a God who judges sin, but he's a God who holds out the gospel of redemption to us. And when you see God in that way, then you have a much greater possibility of recovering from illness and living longer. So I hope you have found this good news on this cold morning. What we're seeing in England and Wales is mirrored in Ireland and in other parts of Europe. I meet with European Pentecostal leaders all the time and evangelical leaders, and I'm hearing the same stories from them. Less people are nominal Christians, but more people are convinced Christians than ever before. And this is actually a fantastic time for the church, a time of harvest, a time for declaration of the gospel, a time for church growth. We are poised to reap a harvest. So let's not grow weary, let's not be discouraged, but let's press on in Jesus' name, because people need Jesus. More and more people are now open to the realization that they need Jesus, and now is the time for the church to stand up and share the gospel of Jesus Christ. So be encouraged today in Jesus' name, and God bless you, and join us again next week for our message from Evangelical Alliance Ireland. It might be Friday, but Sunday's coming.